The Kings have lived to fight another day, and that other day is Friday in New Orleans against the Pelicans, against a team that they are 0-5 against this season. Given that they beat the Warriors, it was either they play a team that they were 0-5 against or a team that they were 4-0 against. And of course, they have to play the team that they are 0-5 against. And now you may say, oh, but Zion is out. And that is obviously a big deal. But then you just look back to January when these teams played. Zion didn't play, and the Pelicans at one point in that game led by 50 points and ended up winning 133 to 100. So the Pelicans have dominated this matchup, whether Zion plays, whether he doesn't. Obviously, still a very big deal. Not saying that it's not, but still, that is the big storyline coming into this game, is how dominant the Pelicans have been. Not just going 5-0, but doing it in dominant fashion in almost every single game. Very few of these games were close. And so it's kind of funny. I feel like both of these play-in games that the Kings are going to play, one against the Warriors just beat them in the playoffs. You have to get a little bit of revenge for that. They did. And so now it's against the Pelicans, a team that they've gone 0-5 against. You have to get a little revenge for that and turn that around. But two teams that the Kings, or where both teams know each other really well. And so I think to some degree, both teams will have figured out what they want to do against the other team, both offensively and defensively. But again, Zion Williamson being out throws a big wrench into all of that. And so the Kings come into this matchup favored, which, just considering everything, is pretty funny, to be honest. The game being in New Orleans. New Orleans hasn't been the best home team. Kings are a pretty solid road team. Don't think that will matter too much. And so I want to look at the box score. Let's just look at the box score for that game in Sacramento when the Kings played the Pelicans without Zion. Sabonis, solid game, efficient, 17, 10, and 6 in a massive loss. But then you look at everyone else. You have Fox, scored 3 points. 3 points. Don't think that's going to happen again. Keegan Murray, 8 points super inefficiently. And you have Chris Duarte in the starting lineup, playing 15 minutes, scoring 1 point, and almost zeros across the rest of his box score. Kevin Huerter and Keon Ellis, and Malik Monk for that matter, all coming off the bench. Chris Duarte being started. This game happened at a time where the Kings didn't know who they were. They were trying to figure things out. And honestly, it hasn't been until very recently that the Kings, until I would say March, the beginning of March, that's when the Kings really figured out who they were. And so even with the injuries to Kevin Huerter and Malik Monk, I think the Kings have still maintained an identity. And I think that's going to help them against the Pelicans this go around. And I think that's exactly why they're favored. I think that's why they beat the Warriors so handedly. But really, I think the biggest thing that this game is going to come down to is pretty simple. And it's 3-point shooting. The Pels have shot extremely well against the Kings from beyond the arc in many of these games. CJ McCollum alone is, I believe, shooting over 70% in the 5 games against the Kings. I don't think he played all 5, so maybe 4 games, but shooting over 70%. For some reason, he still is mad at the Kings organization for not drafting him. Like, that was different ownership. Like, no one in this organization is the same. You need to let that go, bro. But he had a horrible game against the Lakers. The Pelicans have one of the best paint defenses in the league. They are going to collapse hard. And we've seen the Kings have trouble with turnovers against the Pelicans, but also with scoring in the paint and also shooting from deep. So, I mean, they've struggled everywhere against the Pelicans, I think it's fair to say. But I mean, just look at the game against the Warriors that the Kings dominated. They shot well from 3, and that was a massive part. Now, in the first half, they were up 4, and they had been up previously 16 in the second quarter, and they were shooting a solid percentage from 3. Nothing crazy, but obviously it was Keegan Murray who went crazy in the first quarter to get the Kings off to a good start. I think we'll need to see something similar in terms of 3-point shooting. Maybe not 8 for 13 from him, but definitely the Kings have to be respectable from beyond the arc. because this Pelicans team is not going to let them get anything inside easy. I watched the broadcast back for that Kings Warriors game. And of course, on the broadcast, just every time Sabonis has the ball, they're like, wow, they're backing off of him. They're giving him that space, something to watch. Will he take the jumper? And I'm just like, we've been seeing that for 2 years. And the Kings offense was historically good last year and was still solid this year. It's had its problems this year, but teams backing off Sabonis, and specifically the Warriors, has never been the problem. And it wasn't the problem in the playoffs, and I've said this many times. The problem was shooters didn't make open shots. So at the end of the day, in this game, it might come down to just shoot, and it probably will come down to just shooters making shots. And it's a super simplified version of things, and it could come down to other things. But at the end of the day, a lot of times that's what basketball is. It's a make or miss league. And I think specifically when you look at the way the Pelicans play, and you look at the length on their team, and you look at the defensive game plans that they've had against the Kings in the past, Kings will have opportunities from beyond the arc. I just look at a game earlier in the season. I think it was the second game that these two teams played. It was the game where Trey Lyles came back. It was either his first or second game back, I can't remember. From injury, he was out to start the season. And he comes back and he hits 3 threes in a row to start the fourth quarter, and the Kings are right back in the game. Simple as that. The Kings had gotten outplayed by a lot in the first 3 quarters. Trey Lyles comes in, hits some threes, Kings right back in the game. They almost made that comeback. Didn't quite pull it off in the end, but almost made the comeback. I think something we saw against the Warriors was in that stretch in the second quarter where the Warriors came back and got it within 4. It was because the Kings offense wasn't able to take advantage of the stops that they were getting against the Warriors for a time, and that was when the bench was in. The bench is a massive weakness for the Kings right now. The Kings have played this 8-man rotation with Davion, Trey Lyles, and Alex Len coming off the bench. And those 3 guys have played really well, but still it's a weakness. The Kings pretty much went from a 10-man rotation with Monk and Herter. When those guys got hurt, they didn't add anyone to the rotation. They tried, but no one really stepped up. And so they just whittled it down to an 8-man rotation. And in a playoff type environment, that can be fine. And so the starters, again, are going to have to play a lot of minutes. But that just means you're relying on certain guys to have it going offensively. There's no, oh, this guy's having an off night, let's go to this guy off the bench. Like, that's not going to happen. And so when the Kings did slow down offensively, it let the Warriors stick around. Now, in the third quarter, they did an amazing job at fighting off the Warriors' run, fighting off Steph Curry's run, to be able to kill the game off at that point and get their lead back up to where it was. But again, a lot of that had to do with just them making threes. They just made threes. And I mean, the offense looked beautiful using Sabonis as the hub inside. Like, sure, the Warriors were backing off. Yeah, and that just creates open threes. That's what happened in the playoffs. And it's why I've always defended Sabonis. He creates open threes, and it's just on other guys to knock them down. Even in the fourth quarter, the Warriors got it within 13. They had a little bit of momentum, right? It felt like, okay, this game isn't quite over yet. And then back-to-back threes from Keegan and HB to put the game away pretty much. Defensively, the Kings should be able to handle the Pelicans a lot easier without Zion Williamson, because they tried to defend Zion with Harrison Barnes for most of the season. Didn't go well. Now, HB, for a good amount of the games, was actually able to get Zion back on the other end quite a bit. And so that was a positive, but it still was advantage Pelicans, obviously, in that department. And so the Kings put Sabonis on Zion, and that worked a lot better. But then you have HB defending Valanciunas. That didn't work well. And so now the Kings don't have to worry about that. And so that's a massive positive. CJ McCollum and Brandon Ingram both played extremely poorly against the Lakers. And I don't really see that happening again, because they just always play well against the Kings. But I just think this Kings team that we see right now, when you look at the Pelicans without Zion, should be able to win this game because they have a defensive identity and they're going to be much better, you would think, at guarding CJ McCollum and not allowing him to just get open three after open three. Keon Ellis, Davion Mitchell, De'Aaron Fox, all pressuring at the point of attack. It should be much easier with the Kings not having to compensate for Zion Williamson. One thing I also think the Kings did really poorly against the Pelicans this season is winning the transition game. They turned the ball over a lot in transition. That let the Pelicans go on big runs, and it let the Pelicans get out and run and get threes off of that. And this is kind of the same thing I said with the Warriors, except I think it's a little different of a reason. With the Warriors, it's more you have to be secure with the ball, because if you're not, the Warriors are going to punish you on the other end. Curry, Thompson, they're going to go on a big run. With the Kings, I think it's you have to be secure with the ball because the Pelicans are going to try to turn you over. And so with the Warriors, it's more you're worried about the Warriors' offense. With the Pelicans, I think it's more you're worried about the Pelicans from a defensive point of view where they're going to try to turn you over. And I think that starts with De'Aaron Fox. He has to be tight with the ball. He has to take care of it. He's going to be out there going up against Herb Jones, and he just has to be taking care of the ball. Now, he also has to remain aggressive, and he has to attack. And we saw him go to the mid-range a lot against the Warriors, and I liked that. And he attacked in the third quarter. I think we see a more aggressive Fox in important games than we did in most of the regular season. And I think he's always a guy that just steps up his game in the bigger moments, and so we'll see that. But because he's attacking, that means that he could be prone to turning the ball over. And so that's going to be huge for him. It was just a week ago when these two teams played and the Pelicans came out on top. That one was in Sacramento, of course. Zion played, so that made a difference. He scored 31 points. But in that game, Fox had 6 turnovers. Sabonis had 4 turnovers. The Kings combined for 14 turnovers. Also, the Kings haven't been... they weren't tested against the Warriors when it came to clutch time offense. And so it's a little worrying. If this game is close when it's coming down to the end, what do the Kings look like? Because they've looked very poor in the clutch without Malik Monk. And I think the one thing that I saw from the Golden State game that I didn't like was the reliance on Harrison Barnes in the fourth quarter. To Harrison Barnes' credit, he scored, he delivered, he put the game away. But can you rely on that? He was good against the Pelicans in the last game that we played against the Pelicans. He had 22 points. But I felt like he was kind of forcing things against the Warriors. I liked how aggressive he was, but I didn't like how the Kings were just putting him into isolation. And so there's the difference between him just being aggressive versus him being aggressive in a dumb way where it's in isolation. And again, it worked, but we've seen it before where the Kings go to him. It isn't successful. They don't get Fox involved. The ball, we just waste lots of the shot clock on certain possessions with guys who aren't comfortable on the ball and defenses pressuring them, right? You have Keon Ellis take the ball up the floor. You have Harrison Barnes take the ball up the floor. You have these other guys take the ball up the floor, and then the entire possession is just trying to get it to Fox, when you could have just had the ball in his hands from the start and creating from there. And so it's just odd to me that the Kings have changed their game plan offensively in the fourth quarters, but not to the point where they're just going Fox pick and roll. If they just want to go Fox pick and roll with Sabonis, I mean, that's fine. But why would you go Keon Ellis handling the ball? Why would you go Harrison Barnes isolation when they never do that the rest of the game? And so that worries me a little bit. The Jonas Valanciunas situation is also an interesting one because I think at times he's been a good matchup against Sabonis, like a advantage Valanciunas a little bit. Not that he's outplayed Sabonis, but that he's been able to limit him a bit, or at least been able to exploit him a little bit on the other end. But we saw Valanciunas kind of played off the floor in that Lakers game, and I think the Kings could probably do something similar in targeting him a lot on the offensive end. And so I would like to see the Kings do that, is get after him early and try to put him into the actions. And if you could play him off the floor, then That's a lot of size for the Pelicans gone with both Zion and Valanciunas not on the floor. So I think that could be really important. But I do think the Kings have the ability to be able to get out to a big lead in this game. I think they are, they're favored, and I think they should be favored because despite being 0-5, I think when you consider no Zion Williamson, that's just a gift to the Kings. And I don't think we should really take too much away from the Kings' 33-point loss earlier in the season when the Pelicans didn't have Zion. And I also think when you play a team 5 times and you lost every single time, I think you learn more from losses. And so it's hard to beat a team 2 times in a row. It's even harder to beat them 3 times in a row. Harder 4 times in a row, harder 5 times in a row. You'd hope harder 6 times in a row. Like eventually this has to end. And it feels like with every game it's getting more likely. And so it just really feels like the Kings should come away with this win. And I think if they don't, that would be extremely disappointing. If the Pelicans had Zion and then they lose in New Orleans, it's like, it's disappointing, but it's like they just had our number this season. Without Zion Williamson, the Kings should not lose this game. Anyways, that is it for this episode of the Rule Report. I will be back to recap this game against the Pelicans on Friday. Hopefully it's not my last recap of the season. So I'll see you guys then. Peace.